After weeks of quiet rumors and growing speculation, Jacob Landry has finally broken his silence, and what he's revealed is sending shockwaves through everything fans believed they understood about America's most legendary swamp family. The quiet period is over, but the truth may turn out to be far more painful and heartbreaking than anyone was ready for. This is the story they fought hard to keep buried. The silence breaks for 23 long days. Jacob Landry completely vanished from public sight. No social media updates. No appearances. No explanations at all. In the close-knit world of swamp people, where the Landry name carries generations of respect and carries weight across every bayou in Louisiana, that kind of total disappearance speaks louder than any statement ever could. When a man famous for his fierce loyalty and constant presence suddenly goes dark, people notice immediately. They start talking. They start wondering. And, most dangerously, they start assuming the worst. The rumors began small, the way they always do in tight communities where everyone knows everyone's business and secrets are valuable currency. A missed family gathering. Tense exchanges caught on camera but never shown on air. Production delays the network blamed on weather, but insiders knew the real reason was something else entirely. Then the whispers turned darker. Stories of shouting matches. Lines crossed that could never be uncrossed. A family torn apart in ways that even the toughest gator hunts and Louisiana traditions couldn't repair. Industry sources speaking anonymously described turmoil that went far beyond ordinary family arguments. This wasn't about hunting territories, business decisions, or petty disagreements. This was deeply personal. This cut straight to the heart, and for a family whose entire public identity has always been built on unity, loyalty, and unbreakable bonds forged in the unforgiving Louisiana swamps, the implications were catastrophic. Then, just 48 hours ago, Jacob finally spoke. Not through a polished press release or a carefully worded network statement, but with raw, unfiltered words that left no doubt about how serious the crisis really was. His voice carried the exhaustion of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. In the single photo that accompanied his message, his eyes showed a man who had stared into a darkness that had nothing to do with the treacherous waters he navigates for a living. What Jacob revealed in those first moments sent immediate shockwaves through the Swamp People fanbase and far beyond. This wasn't manufactured drama for ratings. This wasn't clever editing designed to boost viewership. This was real, messy, and heartbreaking in a way reality television almost never captures. The Landry family, America's swamp royalty, was breaking apart at the seams. And Jacob stood right at the center, forced to choose between blood and principle, between legacy and truth. The questions came flooding in immediately. What really happened? Who was involved? Could this ever be fixed? And most importantly, how did a family that had survived everything the swamp could throw at them end up here, fractured and fighting battles that had nothing to do with gators or survival? The answers, as Jacob began to share, were far more complicated and painful than anyone expected. The roots of the rift. To truly understand how the Landry family reached this breaking point, you have to understand what it means to carry that name in the Louisiana bayou. The Landrys aren't just alligator hunters. They're an institution, a legacy passed down through generations where fathers teach sons, and sons teach their own sons. They hand down not only techniques for navigating deadly waters and harvesting dangerous prey, but an entire way of life built on principles that do not bend easily. Jacob grew up inside that world, learning directly from legends. The expectations weren't just high, they were absolute. A Landry doesn't quit. A Landry doesn't back down. A Landry protects family above everything else, no matter the personal cost. These weren't suggestions or guidelines. They were commandments carved into the very foundation of what the family stood for, and for years, Jacob lived those principles perfectly. But beneath that seemingly unbreakable surface, tensions had been quietly building for much longer than anyone outside the inner circle realized. Sources close to the family say what looked like minor disagreements years ago were actually early warning signs of much deeper differences in vision, values, and the future direction of both the family business and their public image. The arrival of television cameras changed everything in ways that only became obvious over time. What began as a chance to share their heritage and teach viewers about a dying way of life slowly turned into something far more complicated. Fame brought opportunities, yes, but it also brought pressure, expectations, scrutiny, and, for a family rooted in privacy and tradition, constant exposure that created friction points that grew more painful with every season. Jacob, younger than some family members but old enough to have his own clear vision of what the Landry name should represent, increasingly found himself at odds with decisions being made behind closed doors, financial arrangements that seemed to favor some over others, creative choices that prioritized drama over authenticity, business ventures that drifted away from the family's core values. These weren't explosive fights, not at first. They were the slow buildup of small resentments, unspoken frustrations, and fundamental philosophical differences that simmered quietly for years. Friends of the family described Jacob as someone who inherited his father's intensity but also carried a more modern sense of transparency and fairness. He questioned things previous generations had accepted without debate. He pushed for changes that made some family members uncomfortable. He insisted on standards that didn't always align with the easiest path or the path of maximum profit. The real trouble began when Jacob started speaking up about how family members were treating each other away from the cameras. Stories surfaced of favoritism, of younger family members being taken advantage of financial decisions made without proper consultation or openness. These weren't accusations Jacob made lightly or publicly. He tried to handle everything internally, following the family's long tradition of keeping problems inside the clan, but when those internal channels failed, when his concerns were dismissed, or worse, when he realized some of the people he trusted most were part of the problem instead of the solution, Jacob faced an impossible decision: stay silent and watch the family's integrity slowly erode from within, or speak up and risk being seen as the troublemaker, the betrayer of the very loyalty the Landry name was built on. Those who know Jacob best say the choice tore him apart. This wasn't about ego or personal gain. This was about protecting something he loved, even if it meant standing against people he loved, and in a family where loyalty is the ultimate currency, that kind of stand carries a price very few are willing to pay. The powder keg was ready. It only needed a spark. The breaking point, the explosion, finally came during what was supposed to be a routine family meeting in mid-November. Officially, the gathering was called to discuss the upcoming season's production schedule and business planning. Instead, it became the stage for a confrontation that had been building for months. What happened inside that room, according to multiple people who were present, will forever divide Landry family history into before and after. Jacob arrived prepared. He had documentation. He had questions. And most importantly, he had reached the absolute limit of what he could accept in silence. When the meeting began reviewing financial distributions and upcoming project decisions, Jacob interrupted with concerns that had been eating at him for far too long. Sources say his voice was calm at first, methodical and measured as he laid out discrepancies and patterns that troubled him deeply. The response was not what he hoped for. Instead of acknowledgement or willingness to address the issues, Jacob met defensiveness and deflection. Some family members accused him of undermining family unity. Others suggested he was being ungrateful for opportunities the family had given him. The temperature in the room rose quickly, turning what Jacob intended as a necessary conversation into something far more explosive. Then came the words that changed everything. The exact phrasing varies depending on who's telling the story, but the core remains consistent across every account. Accusations flew about Jacob's motives. Questions were raised about his loyalty. Comparisons were made to past family members who had caused trouble by putting personal concerns above the collective good. For Jacob, those attacks felt like betrayal on top of betrayal. Not only were his legitimate concerns being dismissed, his entire character was being attacked in the process. What happened next shocked everyone present. Jacob, known for his calm demeanor and deep respect for family hierarchy, did not back down. Instead, he doubled down. He demanded accountability. He insisted on transparency. He made it clear he would not participate in arrangements he considered unethical or unfair, no matter who it upset or what traditions it challenged. The room split instantly, between those who quietly supported Jacob's stand and those who saw it as unforgivable disrespect. The meeting collapsed from there. Voices rose. Old grievances completely unrelated to the current issue were dragged into the open. Family members who had carried their own silent frustrations for years suddenly felt permission to voice them. What started as Jacob's confrontation about specific issues turned into a full reckoning. Years of built-up tension, unresolved conflicts, and competing visions for the family's future all poured out at once. Within hours, word of the blow-up had spread through the extended family and reached the production company. By the next morning, the network was in crisis mode, trying to understand what this meant for their flagship show. By that afternoon, Jacob had made a decision that sent shockwaves through everyone involved. He was stepping back, not just from that meeting's conflict, but from everything: production, family appearances, even casual gatherings that had once been sacred parts of Landry life. His walk out of that room marked more than the end of one terrible meeting. It marked the end of an era of silence, of sweeping problems under the rug in the name of unity, of prioritizing appearances over integrity. Jacob left not knowing if he would ever be welcomed back. And those left behind faced the devastating reality that their family might never be the same. The breaking point had arrived. Now came the fallout, collateral damage. The immediate aftermath of the confrontation showed just how deeply the fracture ran through the entire Landry family structure. This wasn't a clean break affecting only Jacob and one or two others. This was a spiderweb of damaged relationships spreading outward, touching every corner of the family and their wider network. Production on the upcoming season stopped dead in its tracks. Network executives who had built an entire programming block around the Landry family's adventures suddenly faced the very real possibility that their flagship show could implode from internal conflict. Emergency meetings were held. Contracts were reviewed. Contingency plans nobody wanted to use were quietly drafted and shared among decision-makers who understood the potential scale of the disaster. But the professional fallout, as serious as it was, paled next to the personal devastation rippling through the family. Siblings found themselves forced to pick sides in a conflict many didn't fully understand. Spouses who had married into the Landry name saw their own marriages strained by the impossible position of supporting their partner while trying to preserve family unity. Children who grew up seeing the family as an unbreakable fortress now watched adults they loved and respected unable to be in the same room without tension thick enough to choke on. The business operations built around the Landry brand were immediately at risk. Joint ventures and partnerships that depended on family cohesion suddenly looked vulnerable. Financial arrangements that only worked when everyone cooperated now required awkward renegotiations and painful restructuring. Long-term plans built on continued family unity had to be reconsidered or scrapped entirely. The machine that generated income and opportunity for multiple generations was seizing up, threatened by the very conflict tearing apart the people who created it. Friends and extended family members found themselves caught in impossible positions. Loyalties that once seemed clear and simple suddenly required careful navigation. Social gatherings that used to bring everyone together became minefields, where one wrong word or perceived slight could reignite the fire. The informal support network that had carried the Landrys through countless hardships fractured along the same lines as the family itself. For Jacob personally, the costs kept multiplying every day. Relationships with family members he deeply loved became strained or completely severed. The daily rhythm of life that always included constant family contact was replaced by silence or awkward, surface-level exchanges that satisfied no one. The sense of belonging that came from being part of something bigger than himself was replaced by isolation and the heavy burden of being labeled the person who broke everything. Perhaps most painful were the effects on younger family members who looked up to Jacob. Nieces and nephews who saw him as a role model now received conflicting messages about his actions and character depending on which adult they spoke to. The clear moral lessons the Landry legacy was supposed to teach, about loyalty, integrity, and family, became confused by adult conflicts they were too young to fully understand but old enough to feel deeply troubled by. The wider swamp community watched from the sidelines with a mix of sadness, recognition, and hope. Many saw echoes of their own family struggles in the Landry crisis. The universal tensions between tradition and change, individual conscience and collective loyalty, speaking truth and keeping peace. If the Landrys can find their way through this darkness, it might offer a roadmap for others facing similar pain. If they cannot, their failure becomes a cautionary tale about the cost of letting problems fester until they explode beyond repair. Jacob himself, according to recent conversations with close confidants, is slowly finding some stability amid the uncertainty. He's accepting that some relationships may never fully heal, that the consequences of his stand will last a lifetime, that the family he returns to, if he returns, will never be the family he left. These acceptances bring their own grief, but also a strange kind of peace that comes from living authentically instead of performing unity that no longer exists. He's learning to measure success not by restoring what once was, but by holding on to integrity while navigating what actually is. Whether that's growth or rationalization depends on your perspective, but it's the foundation Jacob is building his future on. The question that haunts fans and family alike is whether the Landry legacy can survive this chapter. Can a family built on unshakable unity adapt to allow dissent, accountability, and change? Can relationships damaged this severely ever be repaired? Or is the best hope simply managing permanent distance with grace and as little additional harm as possible? Can the next generation learn something valuable from this crisis about integrity, communication, and the complex responsibilities that come with family loyalty? These questions don't have easy answers, and different family members would answer them in very different ways.